Audio Ensemble presents Heroes Die, a short story written by Connor Dean, featuring the voice talents of Jesse Ambrose, Michael Warner, Corey Napolitano, Hosanna Lawson, David Lawson, and Connor Dean. Art, voice direction, and audio editing by David Lawson. We hope you enjoy this audio ensemble production of Heroes Die.
I grew up hating those naive bastards that believe in heroes. I lived in a gutter. There are no heroes in gutters. I shared that gutter with my only friend, Taylor. He was just another street rat like me, just 10 years older and much, much bigger. And one day, Taylor left to go enlist. I guess he got tired of being hungry, damp, and cold. But before he left, he gave me some good advice.
Nathan, 3 things you shouldn't believe in: God, love, and heroes. God isn't real. Nobody loves homeless kids. And heroes die. Remember that, because I'm probably not coming back to give you any more sage advice.
I never saw Taylor again. He probably died a soldier, fighting the beasts at the exterior perimeter. It happens. But his advice was good. I learned that there really isn't a God, and that I should save my breath instead of praying. I learned that the only kind of love you get in the outer districts is the kind that less than reputable women sell to whoever names a good price. As for heroes, I'd only ever heard whispers, and had never actually seen one, so I assumed they were all probably already dead. I know it seems a pretty grim picture of the world, but it's also accurate. I'd always lived on the streets. I didn't own anything but my name, Nathan. I never knew my parents. I got most of my meals at food lines. I ate once a day. Almost all of these things were facts of life for most citizens of the outer districts. Almost. Some people only got to eat once every few days. That's probably because they're the people kids like me would steal from when we didn't make it to the food lines. That was just life in the outer districts. It sucks. It always has, always will. I don't know why I kept going, dragging myself from alley to alley, waiting in food lines and stealing meals from others who weren't vigilant enough to guard their food. I was just some undersized runt with muddy brown hair and an attitude, nothing to distinguish me from all the others in the dirt. I guess I was just waiting for my own time to go. We all die sometime, after all. Does it matter when or where? Death is something you get used to in the outer districts. The beasts raid us constantly. We're a buffer between the exterior and interior perimeters. The beasts get too caught up in hunting us through the slums that the interior perimeter can brace itself. Because of that, you get used to seeing friends go missing. You get used to finding corpses in the alleys, dead bodies that don't have friends or family anymore. The beasts burrow under the walls, or fly over them, or just bust through them, and then us gutter rats in the outer districts die running from them. But our lives are a handful of pivotal moments. I didn't realize that when I was waiting at one of the food lines and the sirens went off. People scrambled, searching for whatever shelters they could get to. Me, I just ran for my alley. I'd hidden there before, and I'd always been safe then. A shadow cruised overhead. I looked up, seeing the silhouette of a dragon through the hazy sky. Its jaws opened. There was a loud, high-pitched shriek, and then a bright flash of green. A building exploded in front of me. A chunk of debris hurtled through the air and slammed into my ribs. Something broke under the impact. The air left my lungs, and I fell face first on the ground. By the time I was able to breathe again, by the time I was able to start pushing myself up off the filthy street, that dragon had landed. It loomed in front of me, maw open, and I knew I was doomed. The world went still and quiet. I just froze in place, barely a few inches off the ground, staring up mutely. It was the silence and stillness of death.
Fire!
A rocket came screeching through the air, impacting the dragon's back. The gust from the explosion blew past me. I could feel the heat from the detonation assaulting my skin. The beast roared. If the rocket were thunder, then that dragon sounded like the whole damn thunderstorm, its breath a fetid storm wind. 2 men in black uniforms with guns came charging out of an alley to my right. They opened up with their weapons, even though the bullets ricocheted off the dragon's armor like scales. The beast's attention was turned, and it flared its wings. And then someone else leapt from a nearby rooftop onto the dragon's back. I saw him draw what looked like a sword, the weapon somehow producing a high-pitched hum. He charged up the dragon's back, slashing once as he reached the base of its neck. Blood sprayed, and the beast went limp. The man with the sword hopped off the corpse, almost with a casual grace.
That bastard's gonna get himself killed!
One of the soldiers to my right muttered. The way my ears were ringing, I almost didn't hear him.
They've been saying that about Raleigh since the day he enlisted. He ain't dead yet,
his comrade replied flatly. I just watched in awe as that man walked towards me, sword in hand. That high-pitched hum had vanished. He was clad entirely in black, with a shaved head and a visor that covered his eyes, 2 glowing red lights marking where they should be. He wore a jacket with a commander's patch stitched onto its shoulder. It wavered and flowed like a cloak as a burst of wind gusted past. He said one word to me.
Run.
I ran and didn't stop until I reached a shelter. There, I overheard stories of a Commander William Raleigh, some great hero of the human race, vanquisher of the beasts. The military police were swapping stories like they were second-hand legends, of the black-clad man who could stave off the beasts with a sword in one hand and a gun in the other. Other civilians like me were whispering stories about him too. It occurred to me then I'd always been hearing about Raleigh. I'd just never bothered to listen until that moment. So I opened my ears, for once in a shelter crowded by hundreds upon hundreds of starving and filthy people, all rank with fear. I listened to the stories that passed in whispers from concerned parent to frightened child, from nervous friend to stalwart companion. I listened and I learned about a hero, about Commander William Raleigh. He was a man who didn't retreat from fights, who was purportedly immortal. I was a naive kid. I believed everything I heard. He became my own personal icon, an actual hero in my eyes. Later, when the attack had ended and the mop-up operations had finished, I found a suitable alley and laid down to sleep. I dreamt of being a hero. It was the only mistake in my life that I don't regret making. The next thing I knew, I was drafting age. I hadn't seen Raleigh again since the day he had saved my life. I was still living on the streets. The world hadn't changed. But I had. All of my free time went to getting into the condition that's expected of soldiers. I stopped stealing food. It meant I had to scrounge a few meals, but heroes don't steal. Commander Raleigh was a war hero in the flesh. He commanded the 1031st Frontline Combat Unit. They were nicknamed the Berserkers. And I wanted nothing more than to be one of them. No longer was I that kid who stands petrified at the sight of humanity's enemy. I was ready to salute, to be a soldier, to hold a loaded gun in my hands and fire it. I was ready to salute the commander and prove that I was the same kind of hero that he was. I was ready. It was still a few days before the recruiters would be in the streets again. As long as you go willingly, then you go to whatever unit you want, provided that unit needs fresh blood. No one signs up to be in a frontline combat unit. FCUs get chewed up and spat out by beasts. Even the Berserkers come back with 50% casualties. So they'd have to let me in. It was noon. Despite the noise of the streets, the world was still silent, and I was walking to find a food line. Word was that the 1031st had been rotated off a 4-year tour of duty on the external perimeter. Everyone was wondering how people who had seen so much death could return so triumphantly. Of course, I knew the answer. They bled and died so we didn't have to. I was almost to the food line when I heard it happen. There was a deafening crack, like thunder, only trailed by alarms and raid sirens. The exterior perimeter had faltered again. and the district wall had been breached. I turned in the direction of the noise to see a beast towering over the rooftops, a hulking mass of scales and muscle called a carnivore. Smaller, man-sized beasts, called raptors, began charging through the streets, running down and mauling everyone that they could catch. One wall breach, and hundreds of the bastards could get in. Once again, District 29 was about to become a feeding frenzy. I ran, but I wasn't running for the shelters. I was looking for a weapon, or for soldiers. I had it all planned out in my head. I'd find soldiers and convince one of them to give me his gun and let me help. That'd be how I'd prove myself. It took me a few minutes to realize how awful of an idea it was. I wound up with a pack of raptors chasing me, alley to alley, street to street. Nothing I could do would shake them from my trail. Nothing. It was hopeless. I rounded one corner and suddenly froze. Commander Raleigh and one soldier, one of his berserkers, were right in front of me, armed and equipped. Raleigh slammed me to the side. He and the other soldiers sprayed their assault rifles, pelting the raptors with bullets. The man accompanying Raleigh ran out of ammo for his assault rifle. He dropped it and drew his sidearm, but he was never able to raise it all the way. A raptor had made its way past Raleigh and tackled the man to the ground, ripping into his flesh with fangs and claws. He died thrashing and screaming. His sidearm covered in blood went skidding across the pavement to me, leaving a crimson streak on the concrete. I was too transfixed on Raleigh to immediately reach out and grab the gun. I was watching a mortal god of war slay his opponents with calculated, silent fury. Raleigh moved like a whirlwind, somehow able to track and counter all of the raptors even as they encircled him. His sword met flesh and produced gouts of blood. Even with his assault rifle held in one hand, he still popped off every shot with impressive accuracy. The bullets finding their marks in eye sockets or joints. He didn't so much as grimace at the terror he faced. Raleigh just fired his gun until it was out of rounds, then went for his pistol and used it just as effectively as his rifle. A raptor that had been feigning death sprang back to its feet. It swung its tail like a whip, knocking Raleigh off his feet. In a blur of motion, the scaly bastard had pinned Raleigh and was trying to maul him, one blood-soaked form trying to rip into another. My hands were suddenly shaking, the rest of me frozen. I was watching, terrified, as my hero was about to die in front of me. I had to do something, so I dove for the pistol. I grabbed it, aimed it, and pulled the trigger only to hear it click impotently. Over and over, click after click, the gun wouldn't fire. But Raleigh didn't need my help. He was able to throw the raptor off with a combination of brute force and flexibility. He grabbed his sword, and that high-pitched hum filled the air as it left its sheath, and slashed the beast's gut, spilling its entrails. The way the blood sprayed off the blade made me realize that its edge was vibrating because Raleigh was pulling a trigger on the weapon's hilt. His finger left that trigger, and the hum slowed and died, and then his full attention was turned to me. My hands were still shaking, but I kept my grasp on the pistol. The red flare from Raleigh's visor was emotionless and terrifying, but that didn't stop me from locking eyes with him. It wasn't the time to waver.
Why didn't you run?
He asked, stepping over the corpse of his fallen comrade towards me.
I heard that berserkers don't run, sir.
I answered, trying as hard as I could to sound impressive.
And you want to be a berserker?
Yes, sir.
Give me your gun.
I offered him the pistol. The tremble in my hands hadn't subsided. Raleigh took it, his red glare swiveling away from me, looking down at the corpse of the man who had fallen. Raleigh took a step back, turned towards that dead body, and reached down and ripped the soldier's patch off his shoulder. He handed it to me.
You do that for all the fallen. That's how you bring the dead home. Understand?
I nodded.
Consider yourself drafted.
He clicked a switch on the side of the pistol, then handed it back to me.
That safety's off now, kid. When you pull the trigger, it will fire.
I asked what was probably the dumbest question possible.
Am I a berserker now?
Yeah. Welcome to the 1031st.
It was my first time beyond the outer district walls. 4 years of brutal training under Raleigh's unblinking eyes had led me to the desolation that was the exterior perimeter. If there really was a hell, whoever ran it probably took design cues from the outside world. Death and desolation are the only words that could come to mind. I had gotten separated from my squad. A lone raptor chased after me. It was the kind of situation that gives you a healthy appreciation for leg day. Unfortunately, it doesn't matter how fast you run when you trip and fall flat on your face, which is exactly what I did. Even in the Berserkers, with all that glorious training afforded me, I was still about as graceful as a concrete fridge in freefall. Hitting the ground hurt. Feeling that raptor pounce on my back and rip at my right leg hurt more. Kicking and screaming did nothing. There was a wet crunch, and then suddenly I'm missing everything below my right knee. For a split second, my vision flashes white, and stars glitter at the edges of my eyes. The world goes cold and numb, and then I'm lost. There's only blackness. I'm told that's when the religious people see God. I certainly didn't see him. I'm told some people see their whole lives flashing before their eyes. Didn't see that either. Just darkness. I woke up in the middle of the night in a field hospital. Some big tent full of groaning soldiers, their beds all separated by tattered curtains. I was a casualty, I slowly realized, missing a leg. Morphine is supposed to do a hell of a job in helping you deal with pain. It, unfortunately, was in short supply, so I cannot confirm that. I can confirm that phantom limb syndrome is real. I felt like I still had my leg. I didn't. I had a prosthetic leg. It would function the same, but it wasn't the same thing. 4 years of training and 2 years out in the front lines, and all I had to show for it was a missing leg. Some hero I was.
You're lucky I was nearby.
It was a voice I had memorized. I hadn't realized that Raleigh was in the medical tent until after he stepped out of the shadows.
That beast could have killed you. You got off lightly, only losing a leg.
Am I still in the 1031st? I asked, not sure whether I should hope that my career was over.
That'll depend on how you cope,
he replied. He took a step forward. The glowing red of his visor stared down on me.
Let me show you something.
Raleigh removed his visor. That was the first and only time I saw the horizontal scar that ran across his face, connecting the two hollow pits that should have held eyes.
These prosthetic eyes aren't as good as human eyes,
Raleigh explained. He put his visor back on.
But I'm just thankful I can still see. I lost them during my first deployment. I was younger than you then. I lead my own unit now. It's not about what kind of parts you got. It's about whether you're still willing to use them. You still have 2 legs. It's just only one of them is natural. Is that going to stop you from standing?
No, sir. It's just, it was a statement I really didn't want to finish.
What?
It feels like I left a part of myself on that battlefield.
We all leave pieces of ourselves on the battlefield. Just make sure they're the kind of pieces that we can replace.
He turned to leave.
Now get yourself rested. The medics will see how well that prosthetic works for you tomorrow. Soldier through it, and you might be out of here before the end of the week. That's what the unit needs. You're no use to anyone in a hospital.
Yes, sir. I slept for a bit. In that state, I wasn't sure about the passage of time. The inside of that field hospital didn't get enough light. A persistent murk hung in the air, making me feel as if it was either dawn or dusk. And some medical officer with a steel apparatus on his face was messing with my new leg. I tensed out of pure surprise. The man seemed to read my mind.
Don't kick me, moron. I'm trying to make sure this prosthesis fits you right. It's part of my job.
I forced myself to relax. Just do it quickly.
Be patient, Nathan.
I figured he'd learned my name because they kept some big roster of all the wounded. It was an easy, logical explanation. Raleigh wants me back on my feet, I replied. He visited me the last time I was awake.
You aren't special. He visits all the wounded, even the ones that aren't in his unit.
Silence from the both of us. Then he looked over to my face. He wasn't a pretty man. He only had one eye, and a full third of his face had been replaced with a steel plate. The other 2/3 were mostly scarred.
You remember what I told you about God and heroes and love, right?
That surprised me enough that I jerked involuntarily. What?
Damn it, kid.
Taylor? That's you? You're alive?
Unfortunately.
Taylor finished toying with my leg and clapped his hands together while standing up.
Your prosthesis is fine. All that's left is for the rest of you to knit back together. And listen to me. Running around with those berserkers is gonna get you killed. Raleigh's a hero, and heroes die. One day, all that stupid shit he tries to pull off will catch up to him. You need to be far, far away when that goes down. Otherwise, you won't be needing a field hospital. You'll be needing a morgue. When your rotation is up, transfer the hell out of that unit.
Thanks for fixing my leg, I replied coldly. Now fuck off, and take your shitty advice with you. Two more years passed. I didn't get wounded again. I survived my first deployment. The 1031st would get to spend the next 4 years training and recruiting, as was the usual protocol for units. 4 years in, 4 years out. I didn't enjoy the blood-soaked outside world, and I really wouldn't miss it. I'd somehow found my way up in Raleigh's command staff. You wouldn't necessarily need to be an officer to be posted there. Just damn good at what you do. I couldn't think of any one thing I did well enough to earn my posting. But maybe Raleigh was just rewarding me for consistently not sucking. But being in the 1031st's command staff wasn't sunshine. It was logistical work, and sometimes ceremonial stuff. Normally, I didn't have to do much, except occasionally escort Raleigh around. I don't know why he needed an escort. The bastard had only gotten scarier with age. We were in a private meeting with the Premier, the Supreme Commander of the military. I didn't know much about him, because I didn't really care much for him. And I didn't really care much for him because it was easy to tell that he's a coward. He was visibly frightened of Raleigh. Granted, a lot of people have that initial reaction. But you'd think the Premier would learn to rein himself in when he's meeting with the heroic defender of the human race. It was a normal status report type of meeting, the kind that every unit has after their tour of duty beyond the exterior perimeter. We told him our casualties, and what kind of recruitment numbers we'd need to be at full strength. He told us how much help he was at liberty to offer, purely as a platitude. He didn't actually like us, and we didn't actually like him. But there was an interruption. Some officer from a logistics unit slammed the door open.
Sir, wall breaches in District 16.
I couldn't tell if she meant it more for Raleigh or the Premier.
Breaches? How many?
Over a dozen. District 16 is being overrun. There aren't enough soldiers to cover the evacuation.
Raleigh and I exchanged glances. Then the Premier replied with,
Declare District 16 lost, seal all entrances, and devote all available resources to reinforcing the surrounding districts.
Raleigh whirled around.
Bastard!
My glorious commanding officer shouted.
There's still people in there!
Acceptable losses. I can't endanger more lives to save a handful.
You're just being a coward. You're so terrified of what might follow those refugees in that you're willing to let them all die even though they're running from the same enemy that our army exists to destroy.
Raleigh's emotionless synthetic glare fixed on the Premier. For a moment, I genuinely thought that bureaucratic bastard was about to piss himself. Unfortunately, he regained his composure.
Fine then, Commander. I hereby license you for independent action. But please, only take volunteers with you on whatever suicidal gambit you come up with.
Raleigh didn't dignify that with a response. I tried to. Yeah, will you go Raleigh cut me off mid-sentence.
Kid, choose a smarter way to end your career. We've got lives to save now. Get your arrogant ass discharged later.
I followed him as he set about reuniting what was left of the 1031st. We'd taken a serious beating during our tour of duty, and now we were going to dive into the fire again. Raleigh flagged down a comms officer, and the next thing I know, he's got a broadcast going to all of the military.
District 16 is currently breached. The evacuation effort is without cover. The Premier has given the order to seal the entrances. Every man, woman, and child in there faces death. The Premier considers them a lost cause. I don't. Sons and daughters of the human race, our friends and family are dying, and I will not let that happen. Not while I can still hold my gun. The 1031st is leaving to cover the evacuation. Anyone else brave enough to come along is welcome.
When his broadcast finished, the whole world was silent. No one moved. We all just absorbed what we heard. I realized then that the 1031st was going in alone, that no one else was even remotely stupid enough to do what we were going to do. It was just us. We were going in alone, and we were all going to die. And then the radio crackled to life.
785th Scout Unit. You can count us in.
1098th FCU. We're signing on.
This is the 487th Stealth Ops Unit. We're gearing up now.
Almost a dozen others joined in the next minute and a half. The military police that were manning the District 16 exits radioed us, saying they'd hold the gates open as long as we needed. An artillery brigade told us that they were at our disposal. Air brigades volunteered to get us berserkers straight into the fray. Another 5 minutes and we were in the air. Tilt-rotor helicopters filled the sky like a swarm of steel wasps, hovering over the eye-like design of mankind's concrete bastion, about to deliver the vengeful wrath of the human race down upon the beasts for daring to violate what little space on this world belonged to us. The battered but defiant human race was about to make the beasts bleed for every inch of District 16, and then some for every life they took. And who better to lead the charge than the 1031st Berserkers? Who better to lead us than Commander Raleigh? It was glorious and triumphant. And it all went to shit the moment we entered District 16's airspace. Dragons ripped apart our formation. An engine on our tilt rotor exploded, sending us spiraling to the ground. I was unconscious for a few minutes after the impact. I woke up in the wreckage with my ears ringing. My body hurt all over, but it was the kind of hurt that meant I'd still be able to get up and do my job. Someone ran over and tried to drag me out of the heap, only for shrapnel from an explosion overhead to rip through his body. There was a growl behind me. I rolled over and saw a raptor standing over me. Spit dripped from his jaws onto my face. Before it could dive in for the kill, a trio of bullets blasted into the monster's head. Raleigh was suddenly in its place, helping me to my feet.
Today you are humanity's wrath!
Raleigh called out to the survivors of the crash.
Teach them the fury of the human race! Kill them all!
We pressed to our original LZ. A lot of brave men and women died in the push, but we made it, and we reunited with the rest of our forces. We had the full might of 3 FCUs, plus us berserkers. There were guys from some scout unit, and I even recall seeing some men who claimed to be stealth ops. But it didn't matter. In that moment, it didn't matter who belonged to what unit. We were all one battle line, fighting with everything we had against an unstoppable horde streaming through the holes in the exterior perimeter. It might have lasted hours, it might have dragged on for days. I was too wired on adrenaline to tell. I lost count of how many times someone pulled my ass out of the fire, and I didn't bother keeping track of all the lives I'd saved. All I focused on was holding back the beasts. We struck at them with enough gunfire to rival a hailstorm. We hit them with high-frequency swords and bayonets that could cut clean through them when they closed distance. There was blood, and screaming, and fire, and fury. There were corpses piled higher than men stood tall. Tanks demolished building and monster alike, bastions of steel amidst thrashing seas of beasts and men, barely kept from being overrun. And Raleigh, covered head to toe in blood and fighting at the forefront, gave us one order over the comm.
Hold the fucking line!
It became our war cry, and we roared it defiantly at the oncoming reptilian masses. Through all the violence, through all the death and destruction, through all the deaths of treasured comrades, through all the blood-stained glory, the eye-stinging smoke, and the screams of wounded men and women, through the crushing fear, numbing adrenaline, and relentless onslaught of our enemies, through every firefight won, through every valiant soldier lost, through every second of the horror from beginning to end, we held the fucking line, and we didn't give them an inch. And eventually, it ended. We got word that the evacuation was clear, and the entrances were sealed. That amazing swarm of tilt rotors, though diminished in size, returned to extract us all. But there was a problem. Raleigh and I wound up being the last 2 left, and the last transport only had room for 1. I motioned for him to get aboard. "I got this!" I shouted, checking my assault rifle and getting ready to die fighting while the aircraft lifted clear of the ground. Raleigh tapped him on my shoulder. I turned around just in time to see a fist speed towards my jaw. By the time I regained my faculties, I was aboard the tilt rotor. The transport was well above the ground. There was something in my hand, Raleigh's commander patch. I heard his voice on the radio.
Raleigh to the artillery. All forces are clear. Begin barrage. Start at the following coordinates and work forward to the district wall. Level everything.
I listened to the coordinates that Raleigh relayed. They demarcated a zone that spanned from our crash site onward.
Roger! Beginning barrage!
Raleigh never made another call on his radio. All we found of him was his jacket, tattered and bloodied. I cradled it in my arms when I found it, fighting back tears with every fiber of my being. It was probably the only article of clothing in history to get buried in full military honors. I kept soldiering on. Eventually, I was in command of the 1031st. I made a lot of hard choices, but I always asked myself what Raleigh would have done. Years flew by in a bloody haze. The next thing I knew, I was nearing my 40s. I saw a lot of recruits come. Most left in body bags. We had some standouts, though. One was a dumb kid named Granger Smith. The first time I saw Granger, he was a little boy caught during a wall breach in District 8. I saved his life and carried on. The next time I saw him, he was a new recruit in the 1031st. He survived everything the beasts threw at him. It was obvious that he looked up to me. He didn't even make an attempt to hide it. It was a stupid thing to do. I wasn't a hero. But despite that, I tried to be to him what Raleigh was to me. Granger was a born leader. I'll always say that about him, regardless of his taste in role models. After a decade and a half, he might wind up commanding his own unit. I'd even entertained the idea of maybe turning the Berserkers over to him, once he was ready. Then we got an ugly deployment. District 30 got a bad breach. The 1031st turned the beasts back. During the mop-up, Granger and I were patrolling a residential area. A raptor charged at us. Granger had his guard down and didn't react quickly enough. Neither did I. But I was fast enough to slam the kid out of the way. I took the mauling that was meant for him. By the time Granger managed to shoot the beast, I knew I wasn't getting back up again. That dumb kid looked like he was going to cry. He kept telling me it was an honor. He should have met Raleigh. That would have been an actual honor for him. But I only had enough breath to do the smart thing.
Likewise, kid,
I told him, before making him take the bloody commander's patch off my uniform. Granger tried to drag me, but the scent of blood attracted more raptors. I made him give me his pistol. Then I told him to run like hell. I somehow managed to get back up to my feet. I totter, dizzy from blood loss. Crimson is leaking out of me from a dozen different wounds. I have a minute of life left in me, at the absolute most. Ahead, a full pack of raptors is charging down the street. I can still hear Granger's footsteps behind me, and I know that unless I do something spectacular, that kid isn't going to have the most fleeting chance of escaping. I suck in what's going to be my last breath. Nathan, you are a stupid bastard, I tell myself. I think back to that one day, that one battle where the beasts came at us in overwhelming numbers, that one moment where humanity held like the most impenetrable of shields, resolve unbroken. I think of Raleigh, and the words he said that spurred us on. That became our war cry. Hold the fucking line, I whisper to myself, raising my pistol. A raptor's head explodes as I squeeze the trigger, thinking of the time I tried to save Raleigh's life without even knowing how to take the safety off a gun. 2 more fall to well-placed shots, and Raleigh's words echo in my head.
Sons and daughters of the human race, our friends and family are dying, and I will not let that happen. Not while I can still hold my gun.
A raptor makes it to melee range. I whip out my high-frequency combat knife and slice its jaw off, remembering that one triumphantly roared battle cry from Raleigh.
Today you are humanity's wrath. Teach them the fury of the human race. Kill them all!
I take a hit and get thrown backwards 15 feet. Sheer willpower keeps me conscious as I slam onto the road. I sit up on the concrete road to see a dozen raptors glaring at me. It's a single, infinite moment, time stretching to nothing as reality sets in. It's the stillness and silence of death. A drumbeat breaks the quiet. Granger is still running, his distant footsteps still audible, still too close. I'm going to die before he can escape. Fuck this, I say, reaching for a grenade on my rigging as I stand. I pluck out the pin and hit the safety lever. Fuck all of you. I'm not done yet. I charge them. They charge me. It's the most horrifying moment of my life, but all I can think about is when Raleigh knocked me out cold, just to force me onto that damned helicopter, just so he could save my worthless life, even at the expense of his own. Damn it, I realize. I'm going to die believing in heroes.